Hello friends, we are here today in the last chapter of Colossians. This is Colossians chapter 4. It's a very small chapter, and he starts off kind of interesting. You know, in the previous chapter he was talking about like wives and husbands and how they should treat each other, and children, how they should treat their parents. And then he says this statement. I don't know why it was cut off, but I guess I'm happy they did. But it says, bondservants, masters, treat your bondservants well. And because you have a master in heaven, you have the same master in heaven. And so treat your servant the same way you would want your master in heaven to treat you. Now the word really is here slave. It shows in many ways. I think I should just say really quick here that the Bible, sometimes you hear people say that the Bible condones slavery, and that's not true at all. At least not slavery in the way that we understand it. When slavery was in the United States, it was for racist reasons. They would take people from Africa, and they would take them over here, and they would treat them as if they were objects. But in the Bible, when it talks about slavery, especially if it's talking about slaves that were owned by Jewish people, they were supposed to let them go after 7 years. And they had rights, and you weren't supposed to beat them, and you weren't supposed to get them because of their race. So there's so many differences. It was more like what happened when people would file for bankruptcy. They would sell themselves into slavery as a way of paying back their debts. And no, I don't think they were treated well often in this world, but the Bible is saying right here, treat your slaves well, because you are a servant. You're a slave to God, and you want him to treat you well. So the slavery that we had in the U.S. is clearly not something that was supported by the Bible. It couldn't be. In fact, when you see the people that abolished the slave trade in England and in the United States, it was almost purely for biblical reasons, and purely done by Christians. So you can't support that. So it's saying here, treat your slaves well, treat your servants well. And I think that would apply to managers and anybody else who's in any authority. Treat the people that work under you well. The next thing it says is that Paul wants the Colossians to pray. Not just for them and their ministry, but to pray for him and his ministry. It's interesting, he doesn't say, pray that I get out of jail. He knows that God has a purpose for it. And then he says something I think is interesting. He says, be wise around the outsiders. That's meaning unbelievers. Be wise around them. I don't know exactly what he means by this, but I think it's great advice. When we're around unbelievers, we should act in a way that they might see the wisdom that we have in God and want it. And we should be wise around them in order so that we might, in some way, bring hope to them. Know that the way that we act around them will be the way that they perceive Christ. They often say that people, the way they come to Christ is not usually through the Bible. It's through looking at Christians and seeing how they act and whether or not that's the way that they want to be. Now I think it's interesting, it ends by mentioning a bunch of people, and I think it's interesting it mentions Onesimus. He is the subject of the book of Philemon. He is a slave that is going back to his master. And we'll be getting to that pretty soon. It's a great book. I would even say it's one of my favorite books, and it's really small. But yes, Onesimus, he is from Colossae, and so is his master, Philemon. And then it mentions that John Mark, the person who wrote the book of Mark, greet John Mark. And I think this is interesting too, because this is later on in Paul's life, and there was a point where Paul and Barnabas had to separate ways because Barnabas, he was supporting his cousin John Mark, and Paul was saying, no, he's a fair weather Christian. He didn't follow us on our first missionary journey. And so there was some bad blood between them, but now toward the end of Paul's life, he's saying, John Mark is with me, greet him. So I think that's really great. That Christians aren't supposed to hold grudges, but it's nice to know that Paul is practicing what he preaches. So finally Paul says, I'm writing this with my own hand. This is one of those books that nobody questions that Paul writes it. And he says, remember my chains. And then he says, goodbye and peace. And when he says, remember my chains, I don't know if he's talking about his handwriting. Like I'm writing this with my own hand. Remember that I'm in chains, and that's why it looks so bad. But I think either way, it's good to remember that Paul wrote this while he was in chains. He is writing this as someone who is in chains and is facing death for proclaiming Christ, and he doesn't regret it. This is something that I feel like when we talk to Christians, we don't want to make things awkward. We don't want the social dynamic of the room to change because we're proclaiming Christ, but that's a very small thing in comparison to being in chains for Christ. Anyways, that's the book of Colossians. Tomorrow we're going to go through the book of John, and so I might ask you to like and comment in that one, because I really want the algorithms to go up. So starting Monday, if you're following along day by day, if I could choose one book for someone to go through with me, I would say it would be the book of John. So tell everyone you know. You really don't need to do that, but I really care a lot about the book of John. So please follow me through there. I'll see you then. Have a great day. Bye.